Good afternoon. My name is Rick Barton, and I'm the President and CEO of the Barton Performance Group. And today, joining me is Alan Jarbeau, the Chief Strategy and Financial Officer from Calco Cutaway. Welcome, Alan.
Thanks, Rick. As Rick said, I'm the CFO and Chief Strategy Officer here at Calco. I'm a licensed CPA and attorney, lifetime operating CFO. And I've been thinking about a topic that's taken various forms over the years, but I wanted to get out to the audience today to start thinking about. And you can call it a lot of things, but I like to think of it in terms of how to maximize ROI by leveraging your supply chain, right? And my background is in manufacturing, so when I say supply chain, I really think of it as the vendors that you're buying raw materials, work in process, your physical, tangible products, and your vendors that provide outside services, right? Such as surface finishing work, paint, plating, could be all sorts of outside services. But there's a whole supply chain that most companies have developed over a lot of years, and we tend to just use them for a pretty narrow scope of services that directly apply to what we do to service our core customers. But I think in doing that, there's really a lot of missed opportunity by not thinking outside the box.
Okay, so let's talk about this. How do you want to approach it, or how many tips do you have, or what kind of structure do you want to follow to be able to talk about maximizing your ROI with supply chain?
I guess the way I look at it, and this is just my opinion, right? So this is just one way of looking at it, and it can be expanded on. Really, there's three ways to look at your supply chain and how to leverage it. One is to reduce cost, which is, I think, how most of us think of our vendors and supply chain, right? We want to get the lowest cost and the best service out of all of them, and that's kind of where we focus. But the other two that I think are in a lot of ways more important and definitely more scalable economically are how to leverage the current supply chain to increase revenue and to reduce invested capital, or in other words, reduce our out-of-pocket capital expenditures.
Okay, so what are some strategies that you found helpful or valuable in reducing cost in the first area?
Really just to reduce costs, and I'll just touch on this for a minute because I think number 2 and 3 are more important, but it kind of gets down to maybe every year doing an annual price review with current vendors, right? And it's hard to do because we all want our prices to go down in an environment of inflation, even if it's low inflation, which it has been historically now for a lot of years, except for a few raw materials seem to go through periods of high inflation, but otherwise that tends to be the primary focus, right? Is just to make sure we're not taking too big of a price increase from vendors, and if we are, trying to understand if that's really the best value that we're getting out of that supplier.
Okay, so reducing cost by looking at your own internal operations, or I
think in terms of just the costs that we're paying for goods and services with our current suppliers, right? If we think of manufacturing and making products, there's all sorts of raw materials that go into that. If you roll up a bill of material and add all that up, those costs can increase exponentially over just a few short years. So one is really just to make sure that those costs are well contained over time. And there might be adjustments in suppliers or product engineering, making a product simpler to keep that cost down, because eventually that cost has to be marked up and resold to your customer, right? So if those costs are increasing too quickly, either your margin is compressed, or if it's not, then your selling prices become too high and you lose the customer.
Okay, let's go and let's shift gears now. Let's talk about how do you increase revenue?
Right. So I think of, increasing revenue, of looking at our supply chain and all the things they can that they're capable of doing? And are we missing out on additional sales to existing customers, or are we missing out on existing sales to new customers that might find value in packaging these services that that entire supply chain offers, right? So here's an example. I won't mention the name of the customer or the company that happened at, but there's a large multinational customer that invests heavily in sales and marketing tools for their dealers and distributors, which is how a lot of their products are sold in North America in that case. So what they do every year is they're spending, I don't know what their CapEx is on their sales kits to the dealers, but they just recently, to my understanding, have spent over made a six-figure investment to refresh all the sales tools, including kits, actual components, re-educating their dealer network and offering new products as well. And then they in turn generate probably a three-figure ROI on that, right? So every dollar they spend, they might be, they're likely increasing their sales by $1 to upwards of $3 in incremental revenue.
Okay.
Right. So it sounds like a lot of money, but when you look at the incremental revenue that's driving, it's really a no-brainer to make that investment.
Two things I really like about that is really the technology standpoint about increasing the value add, how technology is driving more value for your companies. And the second thing is about the partnership, is that we're in this for the long haul and we're looking for creative ways to be able to drive additional income, additional services or product quality.
Yeah, and I think that's how we should all look at our suppliers, not just as a vendor that we're buying something from and how to get the lowest cost, but having a good supply chain that offers a good value. They're real long-term partnerships because some of these, the jobs seem to get harder and more complex all the time, right? So you need that relationship really to solve some pretty challenging problems and do it efficiently.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and let's go into our last area. I believe you brought up by reducing capital investments. Talk to me more about that.
Right. So there's always things we can bring in-house and do it in-house ourselves, right? But is that really the best use of our time? As Rick Barton would ask me all the time, is that the best use of your time?
Absolutely.
Or is that the best use of your capital? And sometimes it makes sense to make the investment and do something in-house. But oftentimes, especially if it's a large CapEx or it requires a lot of space, a lot of facility space, it's high overhead, you need to invest in people, right? That CapEx can reach, mid six figures or in the millions quickly. So are we really thinking of how to leverage our supply chain to reduce invested capital or to reduce our CapEx, right? So even, everywhere I've worked at over 25 years, I've really, I think it's important to understand exactly what all the vendors can do and the capability of their services, right? Otherwise, I sit here and start thinking, should I buy a CNC? Well, those things are pretty expensive. Should I buy a laser cutter, water jet cutting machine, right? Suddenly, I've run out of space. I don't have the skill set in-house, the people that know how to operate these things. CNC machines require programming. They're very complex machinery. Some of them cost $1 million. So really, just in terms of what's the core service that you do in-house and outsource the rest of that and outsource that in a way where you're maximizing ROI again.
And many times your equipment, some of your capital investments have a life cycle. They all do. And does it make sense for you to invest there when maybe the technology turns over so quickly that that's not your core skill set or that's not your core sweet spot for making money? So maybe leveraging the supply chain.
It happens in industries all the time. The one that comes to mind is plastics industry. when vacuum forming and molding first became cost effective and mainstream. It really changed the industry pretty quickly. It reduced the unit cost on parts. It's an expensive tooling charge up front, but you can amortize that cost over a short period with a high volume. So that's just one of many examples, right, of how companies, if they wanted to keep up with that trend and the change in technology, they'd have to spend millions of dollars, and it oftentimes just doesn't make sense, right? So again, you start looking outside your supply chain for companies that have the resources to keep up with technology and utilize it that way and offer value differently.
Absolutely. And the hidden resource that we don't think about a lot is your people. How do you get that team innovation or foster that team innovation, having them look at your three big components that you have available: time, quality, and speed? How do you, or time, cost, and quality, how do you have them look at that and saying, what can we do differently? How can we do this better? What's better kept in-house versus leveraged through our supply chain? They know the people, they know the products, and they know the services. So getting them involved is going to be a source of competitive advantage.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And that, brings into a whole different set of discussion points that we won't get into today regarding management style, change management, executive leadership, right? I see that as sort of a culture and a top-down philosophy. So if I'm thinking like that and having these discussions with the managers and the employees in the company, I hope they start thinking along those lines as well, as how to utilize the supply chain to maximize ROI.
So great conversation today. I appreciate you coming on, talking about how to leverage your supply chain to increase ROI. Great points today. Thanks for being here, Alan, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks for having me. Take care, Rick.